One thing I would ask you to do is if you have the homework assignment easily accessible, go ahead and pull that up. So you can look at the information there. Anybody in here a good artist? Nobody in here is a good artist? I don't know, I think there's got to be some of you in here at least who are very good artists. All right. So one of the things you're asked to determine is the oxygen uptake. And if you take a look at respiratory measurements, here's what you're getting. Normal breathing frequency is between 12 to 18 breaths per minute. We're going to make that 15 breaths per minute. And the alveolar volume was 350 milliliters. So let me back up on that. So here, the first thing we're going to do is we can actually measure oxygen uptake by measuring the expired minute ventilation. So we're going to write a formula, and that formula is going to say that V dot O2, this is oxygen uptake in milliliters per minute. Milliliters of O2 per minute is equal to the expired minute ventilation, that's V dot E, times the fraction of inspired oxygen minus the fraction of expired oxygen. Now, using the data that's given in the information I provided for you, we're going to calculate our expired minute ventilation, and that simply is the breathing frequency so that's breathing frequency times the tidal volume. And if you take a look at the data that was given to you, we're going to say that the breathing frequency is 15 breaths per minute. Times the tidal volume of 500 milliliters per breath. And we can cancel out breath and breath. And so now we've got 15 times 500. You're going to tell me that that's equal to 7,500 milliliters of air per minute. So that's 7,500 milliliters per minute. That's this part right here. So now we're going to calculate oxygen uptake. So in this case, we've got V dot O2 is equal to our expired minute ventilation rate. That's 7,500 milliliters per minute times the difference between the fraction of inspired oxygen minus the fraction of expired oxygen. So in that problem set that I gave to you, what would you tell me? What's the fraction of inspired oxygen? This is something all of you should have memorized. You should remember this for the rest of your lives, because somewhere, somehow, you're going to be with somebody and you're going to want to sit there and say, oh, the percent oxygen air that we breathe is 95%, right? No? What would you say, Tim? What is it?
Was it 20%? 20%?
Yeah, that's approximate number. But what's the number that I gave you in the homework assignment? The real number, do you know?
0.03.
That's correct, very good. That's exactly right. So we've got 0.2093 minus, and what was the fraction of expired oxygen in that homework set? Anybody? 0.179. Thank you. Well, why did I make it 0.179? Well, that's actually a good number. So as you guys are sitting there right now, you've got this oxygen-rich air coming in that has a fraction of inspired O2 that's 0.2093 or 20.93% O2, and the air that is coming out, that's what the fraction of expired oxygen is, that is right around about 18%. I made it 0.179 because it makes the math easy for us. So we've got, we'll say 0.209 minus 0.179, and the difference is what? Miss Amanda? Megan?
0.0303.
Okay, so it's 0.03, right? So we come along, and now, just going to rewrite this. So we got 7,500 milliliters of air per minute times our difference in the fraction of O2. So this is going to be 0.03. And this is O2. And so, what are you guys going to tell me? What is 7,500 times 0.03? you have an answer?
2,250.
2,250?
Well, then, wait.
It's close, right? It's close. About 2,300. But it's not 2,000, is it?
$225.
225, yeah, that's right. And a textbook value for, as you're seeing there, is 250. So, under resting conditions, you would sit there and tell me that the oxygen uptake in milliliters per minute would be approximately 250 milliliters of O2 per minute. Now, if you guys don't know, Miss Megan over here, she used to be an accomplished athlete, water polo player, and you also said a swimmer, right? Both of those are hard sports. Those are not that's not badminton, okay? And I love badminton. Badminton's fun, a lot of fun. Swimming is a lot of work, at least from my perspective. But the point I'm getting at is now let's sit there and think about transitioning from a resting state, which all of you are in, now into something that is equivalent to moderate level exercise, like running a half marathon. And now we're going to change the data set for you. And we're going to come along, and now you guys are going to do these calculations. And we're going to say in this new data set that the expired minute ventilation rate, you need to be able to know this from, be able to calculate this based upon breathing frequency and tidal volume. But we'll just come in here and we'll say that here it's 50,000 milliliters per minute. That's 50 liters per minute. That might seem a lot to you, but if we were to put any of you on a treadmill or a cycloergometer and have you go to progressively higher and higher intensities, most of you probably could get up to an expired minute ventilation rate of 100 liters per minute. And if we actually had you just sit there and try to breathe as rapidly and as much as you possibly can, some of you in here will actually have maximal ventilation rates of 200 liters per minute. And I'll just tell you right now, I'm not going to test you on this, but breathing is never a limitation for exercise. Never. Never, ever, ever. So our lungs are overbuilt in terms of the intensities that we can achieve. Okay, now, so what's our FiO2? That's always going to be the same. I guess I could change it, but we'll just say that it's going to be 0.2093. Now, here's some logic for you to think about. Is that now your muscles are being asked to burn up oxygen at a very high rate. So what do you think is going to happen to the fraction of expired oxygen? You breathe air in, that's the fraction of inspired oxygen, but of that air, of that oxygen that came in, are you going to have the same amount of oxygen going out, or are you going to have less going out, or more going out? What's going to happen to the fraction of expired oxygen as your metabolic level increases?
Down.
It's going to go down, right? Because we've got to extract more oxygen to satisfy the energetic needs of the muscle. So now we're going to say that during this moderate intensity exercise that our fraction of expired oxygen is 15%, or as I wrote it as a decimal, 0.15. So go ahead now and do the math, and let's see what you come up with in terms of the oxygen uptake in milliliters per minute. I've already got the answer. Okay, time's up. The answer is we've got that's an approximation. 0.06 times 50,000 is 3,000 milliliters of oxygen per minute. And so your answer should have been somewhere around there. I think all of you got 2,950. By the way, let me rewrite this formula a little bit differently for you. Because one of the points I want to draw to your attention so it will just use the data that we just discussed. So we're breathing in 50,000 milliliters per minute or 50 liters per minute. By definition, if you're breathing in 50 liters of air per minute, you're breathing out 50 liters of air per minute, right? Your lungs don't accumulate or reduce the volume of air. Whatever is the inspired minute ventilation rate, the expired minute ventilation rate is the same thing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to come along here and we're going to talk about what's the rate at which oxygen is flowing into the lungs. And that simply is this. This is the V dot I. This is the inspiratory minute ventilation rate times 0.2093. So this is the rate at which oxygen is coming into the lungs, minus V dot E times, in this case here, 0.15. And as I said, V dot I and V dot E are virtually identical. So rather than writing the equation this way, the equation is simply written as V dot O2 is equal to V dot E times the difference between these two. So we've got the fraction of inspired O2 minus the fraction of expired O2. Any confusion about that? Don't be bashful, speak up, please. So, we can measure the whole body the rate of oxygen consumption, and you have to understand that the rate of oxygen consumption is driven by the activity of the cells of the body using up oxygen and using up ATP. So we've got to try to satisfy the energetic needs of the muscle. How do we do that? By cellular respiration. That's step number 5. That's a measurement here. This is a whole body measurement. But there's a different way of looking at oxygen uptake. And this is the Fick principle. And the Fick principle says that the rate of oxygen uptake is equal to the cardiac output times the arterial O2 content. Minus Q dot times the venous O2 content. Okay, now let me try to be a little bit more specific. So let's say that we want to take a look at the oxygen uptake of a muscle. So everybody, try to stay with me on this. The point I'm getting at is we want to measure the oxygen uptake of a specific tissue bed. This is a whole body measurement. It doesn't give us any insight in terms of a specific tissue bed. We're going to use the Fick principle to look at a specific tissue bed. And what I need to know is what is the rate at which oxygen is flowing past this particular tissue, and subtract from it the rate at which oxygen shows up on the venous side. So this is simple. This is a supply-demand balance. We've got a certain amount of oxygen we're delivering per unit of time. We're not able to measure the oxygen uptake here in the mitochondria. You can actually do that in cellular preparations, but you can't do that at the tissue level. So we've got to find an indirect way of trying to determine what the oxygen uptake is at the tissue level. So we can calculate the rate at which oxygen is being delivered and the rate at which oxygen is being taken away. And the difference between those two is simply the rate at which this tissue is consuming oxygen. And that's our, let me use black here. I'm going to rewrite this equation in just a moment. But this is our V dot O2. So we can rewrite this equation to read as follows. Is that the flow rate, the blood flow rate, times the so-called AVO2 difference. And this expression here where I've got A minus V in parentheses, O2, that's read as the AVO2 difference. That's the Fick equation. So again, the point I'm going to make is that we can calculate oxygen consumption at the mouth, but that only reflects, it only tells us what's going on at the whole body level. It doesn't tell us what's happening in a specific tissue bed. For instance, if I wanted to take a look at the oxygen uptake of the biceps brachii, I could do that, but I'd have to have a catheter into the brachial artery and one on the brachial vein. And then I can determine the oxygen content in the brachial artery, determine the oxygen content in the brachial vein, and I know the flow rate of blood through that vasculature. Then I can calculate the oxygen uptake for, in this case, the biceps brachii. Okay, now on this handout, you're given information. Yeah, let me just make sure that, yes. Okay. So here's what I need you to do, is you've got some information in this handout related to cardiac output. There's information in there with regards to the calculation of the oxygen content on the arterial side, the oxygen content on the venous side. What I want you to do is use that data in that handout right now and go ahead and calculate what the oxygen uptake is. Remember, the formula for the oxygen content is that the O2 content is equal to the concentration of hemoglobin times the percent saturation of hemoglobin times the O2 binding constant of hemoglobin. And to know what the percent saturation of hemoglobin is, you either have to be given that data or, alternatively, You need to be able to look at a diagram like that. See now, like when I was a student in the class, I'm sitting there listening to my professor, and I'm putting a big asterisk on my piece of paper, my notes going, know this for the test. Do I need to say anything more? Let's have you guys do the calculation and see what you come up with. Yes?
I'm so sorry, can you move your head a little bit, like,
That's the first time that's ever happened in class.
really?
Yes, that's the first time anybody's told me to move. Did you guys hear what she said? She said, could you please move your big fat head? Did you guys hear her say that? I heard her say that. I've heard my wife say that. I've heard my grandchildren say that. Do you have the
No, this one, number 2. I think we get
Got it?
The answer, no.
That's a lot. No. How much do you only consume one loaf a day, or? Is that because you left, or? Chickens, this what's the protein? 35 grams?
Basically, how much oxygen is in that.
Is that kind of fair? Yes, it does. It's even more. What else is it? How much is that? Is that like $5? It's not cheap. You need to get into health, nutrition field.
What was, there was
Well, how do you guys do?
percent saturation constant,
Was it times,
yeah, times hemoglobin times,
oh, another, something else?
yeah.
I thought that was it. I thought it was just
No, you have to look at the graph.
I'm not sure.
You're gonna look at the graph. Yeah, it's about like around there.
So just to be clear, here, all I'm asking you to do is use your normative data, and I'm not even sure why I put that curve up there.
10.3.
And calculate the oxygen uptake using the Fick principle for what we'll say is a normal person, not Mrs. Jones. Did that help you guys out?
No. We don't look at this graph. So, arterial is at 97.
answer is go right on that board there on your right. So it's how you solve it. So to be clear, you're going to use normative data. Now, like I said, I'm not sure what it's going to do. Once you get your answer, how are you doing tonight? You know what? How'd you get that?
Yeah, 60 times 7 multiply that by 60.
Steven. Steven.
That was just a textbook value.
Steven.
I just see, I don't know. Like, look at your notes. Remember he gave you textbook values? Go to the president.
Normative data.
It's fine, right?
Normative data, normative data, normative data, normative data.
Wait, Q is so high. 60 times 7.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's fine, right?
Yeah.
We're using this equation.
Hmm?
We're using this equation.
I don't know.
No, I don't know. Dad, do this right?
Hmm?
Dad, do this right?
Let's see what you got going.
Because molar carbon is 5 molar carbon.
Mhm.
And then arterial side is percent ratio is 0.6.
No. How do you calculate the oxygen content?
Say that?
How do you calculate the oxygen content?
So it is this
So we
equation.
use this. We use this.
So I was Yeah, I got 12.
That's why we make more confused.
I heard that. So do we use this graph?
No. You could, but you don't need to because if you're at 60, you go up around.
It does not seem
the
right.
top.
That's
That's normative 4.97.
I got a number that seems
I
to be
am
wrong.
actually. Wait, Kai, when you did this, did you do this?
So you're in the ballpark. You can solve for
40? Yeah.
O2 content.
Yeah, I
both.
will divide
You
by
guys do that yet?
because units don't
The
work.
normative data that we have.
Okay.
12.6.
Well, I think that would just get you
12.6
Okay, so
for
this is this.
No.
arterial, 12.6 for
Yeah.
arterial,
Or it would get
and
you
then
decimal.
9.75.
It would get you percent if you don't.
Well, yeah, but then the units don't work.
What'd you get?
Well, that's not because he didn't have it right.
I like how he's just,
It's not even.
So this would be
Very close to what I got.
5.7
I'm so far off that.
So 57 times 1.3.
You wanna check our work to see where
But you
we
multiply
went
this.
wrong?
Over 100.
Yeah, that's what I got.
I mean, it seems really low.
You did not. You did
You don't
this.
think so?
No.
Milliliters per minute.
You're using this formula like I was using.
I guess it might.
Well,
Oh, this is what
I
we
did the
got.
top one.
I mean, it's 120 milliliters oxygen per minute.
I did the
I'm
other
sorry,
one.
12.6.
So then,
For the
so
O2
9.7
content
times
for
1.3.
arterial, and then
Why not?
Not,
Seven?
because,
venous,
because
and then
9.497
we minus
times
those,
1.3.
we got
And then so you get
2.66.
dot times.
And then Q dot is, we got 60 beats per minute times 70 milliliters per second. And then
I swear to God, you said
we got 14
It is
of that, and then
percent.
we calculated out the milliliters of blood that's in this. So this is per 100 milliliters of blood. And then we got 120.12 milliliters of O2 per minute of the unit.
But doesn't that just solve the
I don't even remember that equation.
It seems really low.
the arterial? It's not the arterial.
no, this is arterial.
Okay.
Because we use 0.97. Yeah, on the arterial side, it's 9.
very wrong answer.
Oh.
She said it was 300.
Where's that? 9.75? Oh, that's what I put for percent hemoglobin saturation in the venous side because it was 40 milliliters, and because it's 40 milliliters, I just went
12.6.
up on the chart, and I put.
What did you do?
How'd you get that?
Use the I don't know what it's called. I did this.
Okay, yeah, same. And then, yeah, I got 12.6, but then you have to do the fixed principle.
Wait, why though? I don't get it. Oh, thanks. Nico, why did you put it back in there?
How do we do it? I don't know.
Amanda, don't let these guys leech off of you.
We're comparing.
You're comparing your 16,000 to her 300, is that what you're doing?
I got 165.
Okay, all right. Well, let me just say that the 165 is a hell of a lot better than the 16,500.
Well, because I used I was going off the graph when I got home. You were estimating.
My note, you gave us the exact number for normal conditions.
And what were you using?
Sorry, this is, I don't know, Asian shit. Because everyone was the same, because this is arterial and venous.
Okay, so
This is arterial, right? Right, because that's your point.
For every unit that we go beyond 612, how about if I start subtracting 10 points from the total?
Oh, yeah, yeah. How did you get that?
So,
No, it was given.
So that's what I did.
Okay, I could skip it.
and then I got 20. Because this one is like 4.
Yeah, I was multiplied.
I'm trying
It
to
was in the
times by
notes.
5, which gives me like 20. If I get
I got 3.9.
How you guys doing?
we have 20.
But I don't think that's right.
That's a value for what?
Whatever I put in.
Well, what's the oxygen content on the arterial side? I don't think so. That's not the normative data.
That's not.
No, you're using some other data. Supposed to use the normal data. Not patient data. Normal data.
So what's a normal?
Hey, the other guy.
I'm in the same boat as these two over here.
Okay.
Tell me the concentration. The normal concentration.
Amy, how you doing? What's close?
Hey, go back.
Show me how you got that.
No, so I'm trying to see which value I got wrong because I didn't use normative data. So now that I use normative data, I got closer, but I think I'm punching the numbers wrong.
Okay, I got 346.
Where's your arterial? So you're supposed to use.
I got 18.
What's happening? I need to take my pen back.
I think it's 300.
I rounded up, that's why.
Same.
I rounded it right. I thought this was.
Well, I'm glad we're doing this problem. This is a good one. Well, wait a minute. How do you know that's right? So what it says,
What did we calculate?
nasty,
No, but this was for 18. Did you get 18?
if I look at that curve there,
What is that?
The font value was given. That's just, that's just gotta be more hard to do. Yeah, because that's the key job.
saturation heat. Is that what did you do?
0.67 is saturation for venous blood.
I think you're right, actually.
So we're gonna go back to what I said.
There you go. There you go. Once you get there, show us how you got the calculations. Once you're done, then we'll have Steve show us how he did his calculations. What you guys come up with?
I got 30.
You got 30?
Yeah, 30.
30 for what?
30 liters of O2.
What did you get for the oxygen content of the arterial blood?
I got 18.9.
Okay, we'll say 20. No, that's just, no, you're fine. What'd you get for the oxygen content of venous blood? 12.9, all right. So let's just make it 20 minus 13. That's a difference of what? 7, okay?
Okay, so 35.
So that's 7 milliliters per
Per 100.
milliliters of blood, right?
Oh, shoot.
Okay, and what's the cardiac output in that example?
5 times 7 would be 35.
5 liters.
5 liters.
5 liters, so you need to convert that into 5,000. And what's 5,000 times 7? That's, how many? Yeah, times 7.
15.
Oh, shit.
Divided by 100. Because we're talking about milliliters of oxygen per minute. Right? That's how we, oxygen consumption.
Oh, okay.
Do you have it?
Yeah. 350.
We messed it, we messed it.
I got 346.
You can have your marker back, we messed it.
What?
We'll be fine.
Why are you gonna do that? You're up after her.
Okay, after I do some quick calculations.
Okay.
I got 346.
So he says that we should use 0.75, because that's good, but this one is 15.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, with all that.
I got 246. But
346 flat?
5,000. I don't know, it might be different.
Yeah, let's use 5,000 instead of that.
So, 18
Yeah, that's right. No, pretty close, right? Just go down.
Can you give me new numbers for these?
400. Is what I got. I don't know.
You know that's right. Put the recording on.
18, so this one.
And then, okay, oh, yeah, 18, sorry. 18 and 9.75.
It's 8.9 though.
What?
It's 18.9.
So 19.
Yeah, I think I did 19.
The units. I knew where I was going with it. Yeah, I thought it was crazy around here.
Can you do me a favor? Come on down one
So
more line.
462.
And now you're gonna use the fifth principal condensed down, so it's cardiac output times the AVO2.
Can we check as arthritis?
Yeah.
Okay, we're ready for test number 2.
Okay, just, times, what's the difference between? They're cheating, Stephen, you're on there.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Just draw a little squiggly line, to demarcate.
For that,
your
no.
answer
No.
from hers. Now you can go ahead.
This is right.
The worst Stephen one.
You know, let me give you a red pen there. Stephen,
Yeah, this is the
I
one.
don't know how
This
people
is
can
the
see that in the back. Try this back, see if that's better.
250.
Can't see the black, it's too white.
I got they closed it already. 225. Is it gram per minute? What is the unit?
Stephen, your,
Maybe I should just write
your
the
fan
numbers.
club back there is talking to you.
I'll just write.
She wants you to write bigger, if I heard her right.
Okay. Is that big enough? Better. We're not gonna have enough room, my friend.
How's he doing?
No, just when you sat down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know what that says. We'll get there. What was 18.9 minus 14.6 again? 4.3?
4.3.
Cool. Oh shit, see I told you we were gonna run out of room.
How's he doing? Did you see that? Well, Mr. Kai, how's Stephen's results looking?
I didn't get that, but,
Let me ask you another question. Ms. Simran, pay attention. What's the formula to determine the oxygen content of arterial blood?
the hemoglobin times the saturation
The
rate.
what? What? The word's
The
right, but
concentration of hemoglobin.
the concentration of hemoglobin. Ms. Simran, did he write the concentration of hemoglobin properly?
Oh, hello.
Hello, yeah. If I am looking at that right, it looks like he believes that the concentration of hemoglobin is reported as 15 milliliters of oxygen per 100 mLs of blood. Am I reading that correctly? I don't know. I went and saw my ophthalmologist the other day, and yeah, it kind of
Yeah.
looks like he wrote that.
Definitely says that.
Are you gonna change that for him?
You can consider that alternative medicine.
That's pretty good. Have you thought about being a stand-up comedian? That would be a great one.
Grams. Oh. It's just too small, nobody can see that.
Let's see here. So, we've got a difference. So the AVO2 difference. We've got 18.9 milliliters of O2 per 100 mLs of blood minus 14.6. We're going to say, we're just going to make that simple. We're going to say that the AVO2 difference is 4 milliliters of O2 per 100 mLs of blood. Does that sound good? Everybody with me on that or not? The AVO2 difference. It's this minus that. Here's the arterial O2 content minus the venous O2 content. That's the AVO2 difference right there. So the problem reads, we've got cardiac output times the AVO2 difference. The cardiac output is 5,000 milliliters of blood per minute. And the way he worked it out, he calculated a AVO2 difference of 4.3 milliliters per 100 milliliters of blood. So we've got 4 times 5,000, that would be, I'm just approximating, we've got 20,000 divided by 100 because we want to report this as milliliters of oxygen per minute. And so he's coming up with a value of about 200 milliliters, 210, something like that. Amanda did a very nice job on her problem. She has slightly different numbers and came up with a value of 300 milliliters of O2 per minute, which is close to what we got by doing the calculation of ventilation rate times the difference in the fraction of inspired oxygen minus the fraction of expired oxygen. Yeah, no, maybe so. So if you're clueless about that, or if you're struggling with that, you need to come up and sit there and say, hey, I didn't get it. Can you help me out? And of course, I can help you out. But you got to tell me that you didn't get it. So the Fick equation. The Fick equation is used to determine the oxygen uptake across any tissue bed. You could come along and sit there and say, you know what? I'm going to take a look at the O2 content of the blood in the aorta minus the O2 content of the blood in the superior vena cava. That's an AVO2 difference. The aortic blood, or the blood in the aorta, that's arterial blood. The blood in the superior vena cava, that's venous blood. That's an AVO2 difference. That would be looking at the whole body. Like I said, you could sit there and say, I want to do it for muscle. You could sit there and say, you know what? I'm going to do something even smaller. I'm going to take a look at a much smaller cross-section of a muscle, and I'm going to get the artery or arterial that's feeding a little piece of that muscle, or a little piece of the liver, or a little piece of the kidney, or a little piece of the heart. That's the Fick equation, excuse me, the Fick principle. So please make sure that when you are thinking about steps 2 and 4, we're thinking about diffusion. That's what steps 2 and 4 in the small r, diffusion. That's the Fick's law of diffusion. The Fick principle is calculating oxygen uptake within a given tissue bed. Everybody with me on that or not? So Fick principle, or the Fick's law of diffusion, is about diffusion, whereas the Fick principle is about the uptake of oxygen itself, the calculation of oxygen uptake. And Jonathan's going to go talk to his cardiologist tomorrow and sit and say, hey, I learned about the Fick principle, and do you guys ever use that? We'll find out what the answer is. They might sit there and say, oh yeah, we used that 70 years ago. And you'll go, yeah, as a matter of fact, my professor keeps telling us he's an old dinosaur, yeah. So. All right, we've got one other topic to cover. Oop, that was good. Actually, we have 2 other topics to address. The other night, I talked about pulse pressure, and I didn't do any calculations of pulse pressure. The pulse pressure is very simple. The pulse pressure is simply the systolic blood pressure minus the diastolic blood pressure. Very simple. And some individuals will use this as an indirect indice of the contractility of the heart. I'll say it again. An indirect indice or index of the contractility of the heart. And let me just also come back. The other night I talked about ejection fraction. Remember, the ejection fraction is simply the systolic, stroke volume divided by the end diastolic volume times 100. And I want to say, I just want to emphasize to you that the ejection fraction is a very important cardiovascular measurement. The normal range, you guys have that in your notes, you should sit there and say it's somewhere around 50 to 65% of EDV. So make sure that you understand that the ejection fraction is an expression of contractility, and the way this sets up is we're simply dividing or normalizing the stroke volume as a percentage of end diastolic volume. A different way of saying it is what we're stating is that of the volume that filled up the heart during diastole, how much of that are we pumping out during each cardiac cycle? That's what the ejection fraction is. And this is a very important measurement cardiac contractility. And typically, when you start dipping down into the mid-40s, low 40s, clinicians are going to get very curious about what's going on. They're going to want to study that. You might have a measurement where your ejection fraction is 48%. No harm, no foul. If you come back a year or 2 years later, your ejection fraction is 48%, no harm, no foul. You come back 5 years later, ejection fraction is 48%, no harm, no foul, because it's stable. It's a little bit below normal, but it's stable. It's not changing. What if you see your doctor's 48%, you come back a year later, it's 46%. You come back a year later after that, and you're down at 43%. You come back a year after that, and you're at 40%. That's not a good trajectory to be on, because what's happening is the contractility of the heart is decreasing over time. That's not a good thing. And when you get down to those low 40s, doctors are going to start thinking about what's going on with regards to heart failure. Really important. Okay, last part. Last part for lecturing here tonight. Here's our EKG. So we've got our P wave, our Q, R, and S wave. We've got this ST segment. Then we've got the T wave. Just come along and label these. P, Q, R, S, T, ST segment. Now, hopefully all of you would tell me tonight, but definitely on the night of the final, you're going to tell me that the QRS complex represents the depolarization of the ventricles. You're going to tell me that the ST segment represents the contraction of the ventricles. And you're going to tell me that the T wave represents repolarization of the ventricles. The question, though, is that if we could look at an individual cardiac myocyte, what would we see? Now, previously, you've learned about the shape of action potentials. And let me just say that in nerves and in muscles, the duration of an action potential is 2 to 4 milliseconds. The duration of an action potential in ventricular cardiac myocytes is 300 milliseconds. It's a lot longer. So this is an action potential. Here's minus 70 millivolts. And up here, we're going to use plus 60 millivolts. This trace on top is hundreds of thousands of cardiac myocytes depolarizing instantaneously. And so we get this EKG. But we want to know, how does EKG actually correlate to the action potential of an individual cardiac myocyte? And there's phase 0, which is here. Phase 0. Okay, what's happening during phase 0, Mr. Todd? No? Anybody gonna help him out? What's happening during phase 0? Yes.
Depolarization.
That's exactly right. That's very good. So phase 0, we have depolarization of ventricular cardiac myocyte. Megan, since you did so well on that, what is responsible for phase 0? If you don't know, we'll go to Ms. Javati because she was a neuroscience major down at UC San Diego. I'm probably exaggerating on that part.
The depolarization of the SA?
No, this is a ventricular cardiac myocyte. So, depolarization of ventricular cardiac myocyte. The question I'm asking is a really simple one. All you should be able to answer it. What's responsible for that phase right there, Ms. Mia?
Opening, voltage-gated sodium?
That's right. Very good. Well, we've got this part right here. What would you tell me that is? Anybody? Don't be bashful.
The peak.
Say louder.
Peak.
Peak of the action potential. What's responsible for the peak of the action potential?
Closing of voltage gated sodium ion
Good.
channels.
Right. Okay, so we've got phase 1. So we've got the spontaneous closure of the voltage-gated sodium ion channels. Good. We've got phase 2. Phase 2 is here. What's going on during phase 2? Ms. Cimarron, what would you say? So, but what are you going to call phase 2?
Repolarization.
Good. And is it, does it look like full repolarization? Does it look like partial repolarization? That's right, partial repolarization. That's exactly what we're going to call that. So we've got phase 2. And Cimarron, you're going to tell us that repolarization is due to what?
So the potassium flowing out,
So how does that happen?
the voltage-gated potassium ion channels are open.
2 thumbs up. Very good. Excellent. So we've got the opening of voltage-gated potassium ion channels. Now, if those potassium ion channels stay open, which they do, you would expect that the membrane potential should go where?
Down.
Where to?
Zero. Negative.
Negative.
70.
Yeah, right. You would sit there and say should go down to the baseline, right? And that's exactly right. So there's something else going on during phase 3. Now, Mr. Tom, I'm not trying to pick on you, I'm just asking this because you're in the field there, and we've talked about this. Phase 3 corresponds with what part of the EKG? The answer is pretty obvious, right? Because I've drawn that to try to correlate the two. So hopefully all of you say that this phase right here, phase 3, correlates with the ST segment. And phase 3 is all about which ion, Jonathan? That is really good. I heard him say calcium. That was excellent. I think I mentioned before, if you have an individual whose heart is being deprived of oxygen, the ion that's going to show the earliest alteration is that of calcium, because it's got this 10,000-fold concentration gradient. So you look for changes in the ST segment. So what's happening is we've got voltage-gated potassium ion channels that are open that want to drive the membrane potential down to the resting membrane potential, but we have the opening of voltage-gated calcium ion channels which are allowing positive charge to come in. The opening of the voltage-gated potassium ion channels are allowing positive charge to leave, wants to make the cell more negative. The opening of calcium ion channels has got positive charge coming in, that's canceling out the movement of potassium, and therefore we've got a plateau region. So phase 3. Phase 3, ST segment. We've got the plateau. And we've got voltage-gated potassium ion channels which are open. And now we've got voltage-gated calcium ion channels which also open. The heart is incredibly complex, especially when you sit there and look at the movement of ions. Last time I knew, there's over 15 different types of voltage-gated potassium ion channels in the heart. That makes the electrophysiology very complicated. All right, we get to phase 4. And phase 4 corresponds to the T wave. So we're going to go to Ms. Cimarron. And Cimarron, you're going to tell us what's going on here in phase 4. Yeah, and so what's going on there based upon what I've described up to this point?
Is it the sodium-potassium pump? The sodium-potassium pump is
No, don't think so.
calcium goes out. Calcium goes out.
Potassium goes out?
Potassium goes out.
Mr. Vadi, what would you say?
Voltage-gated calcium channels.
Stephen, what would you say?
I would say the same thing that Ms. Javadi just said.
Philip, what would you say?
Same thing they said.
I would say the same thing that they said also, is that we've got these voltage gated calcium ion channels that close. That leaves our voltage gated potassium ion channels open, which takes us back to our resting membrane potential. Good, you guys did great. All right, and then we get to our resting membrane potential. And at the resting membrane potential, you're going to tell me what's going on. Anybody? Miss Rodriguez won't even look at me tonight. She's just got her head buried down there. Luis is volunteering. He's got his hand up. I see it. See, he's raised his, you see him raising his hand, right, Jonathan? He's got his hand up. What's responsible for that resting membrane potential? Okay, all right. And what else? The what? Go ahead and say what you said.
Sorry?
Go ahead and say what you said. What was it? The leaky potassium ion channels are open? That's what you said?
Yes.
That's what I thought you said.
Okay.
Is that the right answer? I think so, right? I think it is. All right, so that's our correlation between the action potential of a single ventricular cardiac myocyte and the EKG. All right, we're done in here for tonight. I'll see you guys upstairs, we'll say in about 15 minutes. And if you got questions, don't be bashful, come on up. And happy to try to answer questions as best as I can.